Hello, everyone, and thank you all so much for being here. This is our webinar for today, Vehicle Safety for Pedestrians 101. We have two webinar facilitators today. We have Mike McGinn, who is the Executive Director with America Walks, and then we have Kevin Mills, who is Vice President of Policy at Rails to Trails, and he is also a board member with America Walks. I'm going to be doing some stuff behind the scenes, but first we wanted to thank our partners for making these great events possible for us here at America Walks and for supporting our work. And then also, thank you to all of you who attend our webinars, on a monthly basis. You have supported our work and donated to make sure that our program and other programs continue to thrive. So thank you so much. These programs allow us to directly support local and grassroots organization and education, along with making an impact on issues at the federal level. So if you like this content and you're a regular guest, please consider making a donation to our cause. And just a quick note on tech. So you'll see a control panel like this one here. And if you have a question, we do a Q&A at the end of the webinar. So if you have any questions that you'd like to put in the chat, we'll try to get to as many as we can. Also, if you need any closed captioning or anything, there's a link in the chat box. And then I'm going to kick it over to Mike, who will go ahead and get started.
Thanks, Kate. And yeah, this is an issue we've been paying attention to for some time. As you know, the vehicle size and weight has been increasing. The way vehicles are designed have an effect. Pedestrian deaths have been going up. And we've been watching for this opportunity to talk about this at a time when it mattered. And right now is a time that it matters, because the federal government is taking input on its vehicle safety rating system. We'll talk about the safety rating system, but you'll also hear discussion from our panelists today about motor vehicle standards, like what should just be automatic, what should be equipment all the time in vehicles. So this is our attempt to start explaining it, and we've rounded up some awesome experts. First is Kathy Chase. She's the President for Advocates for Highway and Auto Safety. And they work on this issue of advancing motor vehicle safety and automated driver system safety. Their organization played a key role in having Congress direct the US DOT and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration to begin rulemaking on these issues. David Ward is the Executive Vice President of the Towards Zero Foundation. It's a UK registered charity promoting safe and sustainable road transport worldwide. And one of their major projects is global NCAP. And NCAP is the phrase that's used for the safety rating system. So he'll be able to talk about US NCAP and how it compares to NCAP and safety rating and vehicle safety globally as well. And Sindhu is the Program Manager of Policy at NACTO, National Association of City Transportation Officials. NACTO is a great partner. Their focus at NACTO is, if you're thinking about transportation engineering and who's coming up with the progressive and innovative ways to create our city streets and town streets, they're the ones to look to. They were a great partner with us on the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Device update, or perhaps I should say we were a great partner with them. It was a team effort on that one. So she leads their work on emerging technology and innovation, and of course they are engaging this one as well at the federal level. So with that, we're going to turn it over to Kathy to give you, to get us started on understanding what's at play and how to start thinking about it.
Thanks, Mike. So Kate, I think you're going to turn the control over so I can put my panels up.
Yeah, I believe I just made you the presenter. Did that not work?
I didn't get the little message that I've gotten before. Okay, I just got it. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Terrific. Technology is good when it works. Thank you so much for this opportunity to participate today. My name is Kathy Chase. I'm the president of Advocates for Highway and Auto Safety. For those of you who aren't familiar with our organization, hold on. There we go. We're a nonprofit safety organization headquartered in Washington, D.C. We have a board of directors that's comprised of some of the leading property casualty insurance companies and some of the leading public health, safety, consumer, law enforcement, and medical organizations and individuals. Our board composition is quite unique, as is our mission, which is safe roads, safe road users, and safe roadway environments. And we put together this screen just to give a little snapshot of some of the issues that we've been working to advance since our inception in 1989. And on this, the most recent accomplishment, which of course no one achieves alone, but is the requirement for rear view cameras. And I bring this one up very quickly because obviously it has tremendous impact on pedestrians, and more specifically, smaller youthful pedestrians who can easily be in the blind zone. So working to advance that requirement that they be included in all new cars was a very significant accomplishment. And then most recently, we worked, as Mike mentioned, to advance safety improvements in the what is called the IIJA, the investment, now I'm blanking on the Job Act, and which I will talk about in a few minutes. The reason why we're all here today is because fatalities are skyrocketing. We're reaching really horrible levels. And in fact, the Deputy Administrator of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, also known as NHTSA, participated in a press conference this morning on Click It or Ticket. And he previewed the fact that the 2021 figures are going to be coming out early next week, and it sounds like they're quite grim, even worse than shown on this screen, which is pretty abominable. So that's why we wanted to talk to you today. This really comes down to safety. And I just wanted to flag that not only are these figures horrible, I also wanted to highlight that pedestrian fatalities are up about 4% since the highest number since 1989, which totaled 6,516 pedestrians killed. And it's really an issue that not only are there solutions for, but the solutions are available now. Some of the causes of this behavior are really can be boiled down to reckless behavior, which doesn't mean that that the solutions are behavioral, but rather that people perhaps, confined and stressed during the pandemic, took it out on the roadways. Some of the biggest causes were impaired driving, distracted driving, excessive speeding, and people not buckling up. I wanted to, of course, highlight that these issues are receiving national attention in publications. To the New York Times, Newsweek, the Washington Post, the Deseret News, are all had highlighting stories about pedestrian fatalities specifically. And in reflecting on this presentation today, I was thinking about what being a pedestrian and what walking means. And to me, it really means a type of freedom. And by walking, I want to say that I'm being inclusive, or trying to be inclusive, and including rolling, people who are in wheelchairs, use wheelchairs, and other assistive devices. I actually grew up in a city in New Jersey and walked everywhere. As far as my youth brings me back, I walked to school, I walked back and forth to make my own lunch, and I walked to go out and play with my friends. And I did that for a significant amount of my youth. And then we moved to the suburbs, and you couldn't walk anywhere. So I quickly took up biking, but it wasn't quite the same. I enjoy walking and biking, but there's something to walking that I just wanted to say. It really should not be a death-defying act, as has been experienced on our roadways. And I think we can all share in the fact that walking was also an outlet during COVID. There were no words more receptive to my ears than a friend calling and saying, hey, do you want to go for a walk? So we really need to do what needs to be done to improve safety on our sidewalks, on our roadways, and for all road users. So today we're here to talk about the US NCAP, as Mike mentioned. And this is particularly timely because the comment period where anyone can make a comment about the proposal is open. We were able to get an extension until the beginning of June. This is just a quick timeline of the NCAP program. It, as you can see, started during the Carter administration by the NHTSA administrator, Joan Claybrook, who's actually one of my board members. And at that time, they were looking to inspire auto manufacturers to exceed the minimum performance standards by testing how cars crashed at 35 miles an hour. And it was a wildly successful program. And it really did inspire auto manufacturers to make safer cars. But then through the years, as you'll see, there's been a lot of inaction to keep it up to speed. And I think David Ward will be talking about how the US compares to internationally. While the US NCAP was the first in the world to start it, we've fallen drastically behind other countries. And then this year, NHTSA released a new proposal. And there are changes. It's a mixed bag. It's 200 plus pages, so it can be a little daunting, but I'm going to try to break it down in terms of what is covered for pedestrian safety. A couple of years ago, we had an event. There's David Ward and Joan Claybrook, and also another one of my board members, Jack Gillis, who recently retired from the head of the Consumer Federation of America. We had an event celebrating the 40th anniversary, during which time we released this paper, which can be found on our website. I think Kate is going to put some sites that I shared with her in the chat box, so you can check it out if you're interested. And it really revealed the inadequacies with the current program. We made some key recommendations, which included boosting pre-crash performance and also improving public access to NCAP ratings. So this is an event. We had a great press coverage, and really featured at that time the need to improve NCAP. As I mentioned, we worked on the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. There were two bills in Congress, the Invest in America that was in the House, and frankly, that was stronger in terms of the safety provisions. But what got enacted was the IIJA, and we've been calling on the US Department of Transportation to view this new law as a floor and not a ceiling for what can be accomplished, because DOT has that authority. So these are some of the issues that were included in the Invest Act, which inspired inclusion in the IIJA, which President Biden signed into law last November. In terms of the NCAP proposal, these are very quickly the additions in terms of pedestrian safety that I wanted to feature for you. It does add pedestrian AEB, which is automatic emergency braking, which means that if a driver is distracted or drowsy or impaired in some way and is not braking, the car will warn the driver and then ultimately brake the vehicle if the driver is not responsive. And so obviously we want the car to be able to detect pedestrians as well as bicyclists. However, bicyclists were not included in the NCAP proposal. In terms of the other offerings in the proposal, there were plans to propose and consider, which are, for our liking, not strong enough action verbs, and our comments will be reflecting that, pedestrian crash worthiness and vehicle lighting technology and other vehicle safety technologies. But the reason why I wanted to point out vehicle lighting technology is because you'll see in the right box here that significant amount of pedestrian fatalities occur at nighttime, and advanced lighting or headlamps already is available. We need it to be required and also included in the NCAP proposal, or ultimately the final rule. While we're pushing to improve the NCAP, we also are simultaneously pushing for new regulations. And we are strong proponents of Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards, or FMVSS, which are the regulations which require there to be certain technologies and systems in vehicles. Like right now, as I mentioned earlier, the rear view cameras, that's one example. So we want to, we've been pushing for the US Department of Transportation to issue AEB with pedestrian technology, as well as other safety improvements. And the reason why we're doing this is because if it's standard equipment, the auto manufacturers cannot upcharge as they are now. And that makes it really more equitable for all families to be able to get the safest vehicles that are available with the. What can you do? This is the call to action. I encourage you to contact your members of Congress and urge them to put pressure on the US Department of Transportation to accomplish what Congress has mandated, and also to submit comments to the Federal Register, like the NCAP proposal. It is very easy to do. It may sound a little daunting, but it's really not. If you just Google Federal Register, or if you can recall or jot down federalregister.gov, right on that homepage, there are tips of how to submit comments. And then if you put in the search box NCAP, which again is the new car assessment program, that particular comment will pop right up and you can submit comments. So it's not that daunting. Also, I just want to provide you with our organization, my email, which is here on this slide, and other organizations with whom we work that are also working to improve NCAP, in addition to America Walks, which is a tremendous valued partner of advocates. So Kids in Car Safety, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, Families for Safer Streets, StopDistraction.org. They're all great advocacy organizations out there. So find your passion and get involved and make the road safer for all. And thank you again to Mike and Kate for this opportunity. I'm looking forward to our Q&A. Hello?
Hi, yes, thank you so much, Kathy. I just switched the presentation over to David Ward. He will be presenting next with some really good information on the European NCAP.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Mike, and and to America Walks for this opportunity, and greetings from over in the UK. And it's wonderful to follow Kathy, and I'm such an admirer of what advocates do. They really keep the pressure on, which is so important. And as she showed in her slides, the NCAP world started in the US. And she doesn't mind this expression. The mother of all the NCAPs was Joan Claybrook when she was administrator in the late 1970s at NHTSA. And the idea that she and her colleagues had, which was so powerful, was to try and use consumer information to accelerate progress beyond existing federal standards. And so it's this combination of regulatory push, which is what the standards should do, usually set at a sort of minimum level, whereas NCAPs can test more stringently, and they create demand pull. They encourage consumers to buy the safest car they can afford, and they also encourage manufacturers to show the best that they can do. And that model has been incredibly powerful right across the world. And pretty soon after the development of the US NHTSA, copycats started popping up around the world. There was Japan NCAP was set up, then Australian NCAP, then Euro NCAP, which I was very involved in founding back in 1997. And there's Korean NCAP, China NCAP, Latin NCAP, ASEAN NCAP for Southeast Asia, and there are also sort of pilot programs which we help to run in India, and also now in Africa. So the model that Joan and her colleagues at NHTSA invented is just a really extraordinary success story in terms of advancing vehicle safety. I guess one of the most important things is that its major achievements in the first phase of the world of NCAPs has been in improving occupant protection. And we have seen huge improvements in occupant protection. If you take Europe as an example, the improvements in occupant protection there, partly through legislation, but also through Euro NCAP, has halved the level of deaths of vehicle occupants and has been the single biggest contributor to an overall halving of road deaths over the last 20 years. So that's a significant achievement. But of course, we know, it's already been highlighted, particularly in the US, where you've got this big spike in pedestrian deaths, which is extremely worrying, that we've got to pay attention not just to vehicle occupants, but also to vulnerable road users, pedestrians and bicyclists and so on. And that's really the challenge for NCAPs now, and they are embracing that. And but I would like to emphasize the key points, if you like, the sort of, it sounds a bit abstract, but the key principle should be, is that NCAP should be more stringent than regulation. They are much more flexible than regulation. It takes a while, obviously, to go through legislative processes, but in principle, NCAPs can adapt their testing protocols much quicker. And then they then provide this stretching, performance challenging method to manufacturers. And I think a really important point is that in NCAP programs, we shouldn't expect all cars to get 5-star. In fact, if all cars are getting 5-star, what that tells you is the NCAP program is too soft. It's not stretching performance. It's become a kind of status quo. And one's got to think of it in sporting terms. You know, not everybody can win a gold medal. 5 stars have to be quite tough to reach. And so one of the really important things about this, to make this happen, is that NCAPs must fairly frequently update their test requirements to embrace other test configurations, new technologies, and so on. And that has been happening in almost all the NCAPs around the world, approximately on a sort of 5-year interval. And the really striking thing about US NCAP is that it hasn't been upgraded for 10 years. And I think that's really the story of why, in particular, US NCAP has fallen behind best performance of NCAPs around the world. It's always difficult to make exact comparisons between NCAPs, but certainly the most advanced for sure is Euro NCAP. But even now, I would say that certainly Japan NCAP, China NCAP probably is on a par, maybe even in some areas more advanced than US NCAP. And so that 10-year delay, and there are lots of reasons for that, but essentially the proposals that were late in the Obama administration got stalled when Trump got in. That has been a real disaster, and that's why we very much welcome the NHTSA upgrade. But we also agree very strongly with advocates that it needs a lot of public engagement and can be improved, and actually follow what I was suggesting, which is it should be a real performance enhancer and on the more stringent side, because it's not a regulation, it's a performance test. And on that, I think another thing worth highlighting is that the US, because if you like, NCAP has fallen behind, the US is also behind on now what are becoming pretty wide practice on regulatory standards too. And something I'd like to highlight, and it's available to share later, is there's a new UN Decade of Action for Road Safety till 2030. There's a global plan being published last year. It has a section on vehicles and a list of recommended technologies. And in there are things like autonomous emergency braking, which Kathy already highlighted, intelligent speed assistance, which I think is a very important thing. Also, motorcycle anti-lock brakes. The US, to me, astonishing, does not yet mandate anti-lock brakes on motorcycles. Now, in some areas, it's really falling behind. India mandates anti-lock brakes on motorcycles. So why not the US? And the EU, I wish I could say I'm sounding very complacent, but completely stupidly, my country voted to leave the EU, which I never approved of. But the EU is a world leader now, both in regulatory terms and in NCAP. And from July the 6th this year, there's a new package of regulations, and I've also included a list of them, about 15 different measures that includes, as I mentioned, all these things, AEB, ISA, and so on. And they will be mandatory for new vehicles in a rollout over a number of years from July the 6th. So it's the biggest upgrade of vehicle safety across Europe for at least 20 years. And I very much hope the UK will follow, despite all the difficulties with Brexit. And I would like to highlight in particular, and I've also added a slide on that, the significance of intelligent speed assistance. It is pretty remarkable. The EU is now the world's second largest vehicle market after China. And so from July, all new models will have to have intelligent speed assistance systems, and they work combination of GPS, satellite maps, or cameras, sometimes in combination. They inform the driver and the vehicle of the speed limit. They will slow the vehicle to the speed limit, but they can be overridden. I have a retrofit system in my vehicle. I love it. It means I don't have to worry about getting stupid speeding tickets when I'm not paying attention in local roads the way when, or if I'm in an environment I'm not familiar with. It encourages a relaxed driving style, which also saves fuel. So to me, ISA is a very important technology. And I would say it's a bit unadventurous to just have ISA as a should we do this question. It's already being regulated in the second largest vehicle market in the world. So why not just put it straight into the US NCAP? You don't have to do all the studies of how it works or cost benefit analysis. You just borrow everything that the European institutions have already got. I also would highlight pedestrian testing. This is an old story. Since early 2000s, Europe, first under a voluntary agreement with manufacturers, has had softer car fronts to minimize or mitigate the impact of a pedestrian. It became a regulatory standard in 2005, I recall, also in Japan and many other. It's also included, for instance, in India as a regulatory requirement. So again, I'm disappointed that it's not there, or at least it's not been included, especially because, in fact, the Obama upgrade proposal in 2015 was to include it. So somehow in the churning of ideas, it sort of dropped back a bit, and I don't really see why. So there are some specific issues there that I think are worth highlighting. And I have to say, and it's not with any pleasure, look at the difference in performance in road deaths, Europe versus the US over the last few years, and it's quite stark. I mean, the US is having these big increases. In the EU, road deaths are now down to 19,800. That's 13% lower than the 2019 figure. Of course, the pandemic has affected things a bit, but it does show that these policies actually work and are effective. So I think it's a very good time now for the advocacy work to begin. I think that there's a clear will to make progress in NHTSA and under Secretary Buttigieg and all the rest. So I'm optimistic that there'll be some improvements. And we're very much looking forward to seeing that happen, because for all of us, the US was the leader, and it's been disappointing to see the US fall back. So looking forward to the discussion. Thanks very much.
Thank you, David. Next up is Sindhu.
I'm just pulling up my slides. Can you see them?
Looks great.
Excellent. So hello, everyone. My name is Sindhu. I am the program manager for policy at NACTO, which is the National Association of City Transportation Officials. For background, we represent 89 cities and transit agencies across the US, and we create design guidance that is tailored to cities on how to make streets better for people walking, biking, and taking transit. We have also partnered with the US DOT Volpe Center to create guidance on how vehicle design features can make city streets safer. And I believe Kate has pinned those publications as handouts, so thank you for that. And it's really that work that informs a lot of this presentation that you're about to see, as well as our comments on the proposed updates to NCAP. So as the other presenters have touched on, NHTSA will finally be incorporating pedestrian safety into NCAP this year, and will be weighing a vehicle's ability to protect people outside the car when assigning a star rating. And this is a major paradigm shift in how we think about road safety in this country. Until now, NCAP safety ratings were based entirely on how well the vehicle protected people who were in the car. And this change really couldn't come at a more critical time, because fatalities and serious injuries among pedestrians and cyclists have really skyrocketed. by over 50% in the past 10 years. And deaths of people outside of vehicles have greatly outpaced overall roadway fatalities. And NHTSA's plan to combat this problem is to really rely on ADAS, or advanced driver assistance systems technologies, to protect people who are traveling outside of vehicles. And features like blind spot detection and intervention, lane keeping support, and pedestrian automatic emergency braking are tools that are proven to reduce crashes between vehicles and pedestrians before they happen. PAEB, or pedestrian automatic emergency braking, is specifically associated with a 33% reduction in crashes. But it is worth pointing out that on their own, these systems are not necessarily a silver bullet solutions to the safety issues that vehicles pose to pedestrians. So to illustrate why that is, let's take a closer look at PAEB particularly. Now what you see here is an excerpt from the owner's manual for the 2020 Toyota Camry, a car that's equipped with pedestrian AEB. And this lists several scenarios in which the front camera and sensors cannot reliably detect pedestrians. And this is actually only half the list. And it includes, people who are walking in groups, people who are walking quickly, holding or pushing large objects. And it also struggles sometimes to detect children and smaller adults. And this technology can also struggle to detect people with darker skin. There was a 2019 study conducted by the Georgia Institute of Technology that demonstrated that automated vehicle technology doesn't see darker skin as well as lighter skin. And we know that people of color are disproportionately killed while walking and are more likely to live in communities that have unsafe or inadequate infrastructure for walking and biking. So testing crash avoidance technology on its ability to detect and respond to people of color is extremely necessary if we want to eliminate these disparities. And even vehicle manufacturers are saying what regulators and researchers have already confirmed, which is that a pedestrian AEB can struggle to detect people in low light or poor weather environments. There was a recent study by the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety that found that pedestrian AEB was effective in daylight or otherwise well-lit conditions, but the same study said that it's less effective in the darkness or under inclement weather conditions. And these are the same conditions that happen to be when crashes are most likely to occur. And pedestrian AEB also performs best at lower speeds. The 32% reduction in crashes that was observed in vehicles was in vehicles traveling at below 25 miles per hour. And there was no reduction associated for vehicles at 50 miles per hour or while turning. And this graphic here is specific to AEB performance on trucks, but not cars, although the same principle is illustrated, which is that braking time and distance is fastest at lower speeds, even though we know that vehicles are the most dangerous when they're traveling at higher speeds. And lastly, tests to ensure that AEB systems can detect cyclists are notably absent from this update. And NHTSA is proposing that they will reconsider in 2025. And this is problematic because not only would this put the American NCAP even further behind its international counterparts that are already testing how well vehicles can detect and react to cyclists, but it would exacerbate the ongoing and very serious cyclist safety crisis on our streets. So to be clear, ADAS is very much an important piece of the vehicle safety puzzle, and technologies like pedestrian AEB are capable of and already have saved lives and can definitely save more. But ADAS on its own isn't enough to really reduce pedestrian and cyclist fatalities on US roads. And there's a lot more that NHTSA can and should do to update NCAP that can really go further in making vehicles safer for the people who are walking and biking around them. And that's why NACTO is recommending that we need a multi-layered design approach to keep pedestrians safe from vehicles. So let's talk a little bit about what causes crashes and why they're so deadly for people who are walking, biking, and rolling on our streets. There are three major factors that make vehicles dangerous, and those are speed, vehicle size and weight, and visibility. Speed and weight, we know, increase both the lethality of a crash and as well as its likelihood, because drivers cannot react fast enough to stop in time, and stopping distance, or how long it takes to stop a vehicle, increases with speed. And poor visibility can really exacerbate this because it limits what a driver can see and gives them even less time to react to changing conditions. And while cities can take action to reduce speeds and speed limits on their street, the regulation of vehicle size, weight, and visibility are entirely in the hands of the federal government and NHTSA specifically. NCAP is a really unique tool to leverage consumer power to demand safer vehicles. And there's an increasing body of evidence that vehicle size, particularly hood height and visibility from the driver's seat, are major causes that are driving the increase in pedestrian fatalities. You may remember this 2018 article from the Detroit Free Press, which describes how SUVs and pickup trucks make up the biggest share of vehicle sales, have grown larger over time, and are much deadlier to people who are walking near them. And the reason for this is pretty intuitive. Being struck at leg height by a car is much less likely to result in a death or serious injury than being struck in the head or abdomen. And in 2015, NHTSA themselves noted that pedestrians are 2 or 3 times more likely to die when struck by an SUV or a pickup truck than by a sedan. And that conclusion was reached based on data that was collected in 2006. And since then, vehicles have only become bigger and heavier. And compounding the issue of where pedestrians get hit, pedestrians are also more likely to get hit if the driver literally cannot see them because their visibility is limited from the driver's seat. There was a recent IHS study that found that pickup trucks are 4 times more likely and SUVs 3 times more likely to cause a fatal crash when turning because of limited visibility from the driver's seat. And similarly, the US DOT Volpe Center shows that when drivers who are operating trucks with low visibility are only able to detect pedestrians in a crosswalk 13% of the time, compared to 100% of the time when they're driving vehicles that have better visibility. And I'm going to quote from the IHS directly, and they are not an organization that's known for exaggerating, but they said, quote, "The size, shape, and location of the A pillars that support the roof on either side of the windshield could make it harder for drivers of larger vehicles to see crossing pedestrians when they're turning." And regulating these design features is firmly within the power of NHTSA and NCAP. And just to emphasize again, ADAS won't fix this and cannot on its own be considered as an adequate replacement for directly being able to see things. A study that was conducted among truck drivers found that even distracted drivers in vehicles with better visibility were less likely to strike pedestrians than undistracted drivers in vehicles that had poor visibility. And note that this was a study that was performed among professional drivers who had training and commercial licenses, which are not things that are required of drivers behind the wheels of the increasingly large and heavy passenger vehicles that we see regularly on city streets. So despite these known issues with vehicle height, weight, and visibility that NHTSA themselves have repeatedly acknowledged, the proposed NCAP update does not require automakers to account for these safety issues. But there are solutions that organizations and individuals can advocate for with this update to NCAP. So NHTSA plans to propose a crashworthiness pedestrian protection testing program in 2022, and to create standards that ensure safety for the widest possible range of people. NACTO strongly recommends following the approach that Transport for London created by selecting smaller than average people as their default test case or user. And the proposed crashworthiness tests that NHTSA put forward will produce very different results based on who the test person is. Compare the results for a 6-foot tall adult versus a 4-foot tall child. And a vehicle that might hit an adult in the upper leg would hit the child at the abdomen or head, which would result in much worse outcomes. And designing test criteria built around the smaller than average person will result in better safety outcomes for everybody. And in this update of NCAP, NHTSA can ensure that vehicles that do not provide protection for people outside the vehicles, including children, are not receiving 5-star ratings. And also, tools for evaluating visibility already exist. USDOT has its own blind zone calculator that provides visibility scores for different vehicle models. And it also assesses the safety impacts of vehicles on different types of vulnerable road users, from children to people using wheelchairs. And NACTO strongly recommends incorporating this calculator or any equivalent tool into issuing NCAP ratings. And with this calculator, you can also compare different vehicle types and models of vehicles. The Volpe Center at USDOT is still collecting data, but there is already an established correlation between low visibility and increased crash risk, as this scatter plot shows. And the public really deserves to have this information about the safety and risk of the vehicles that they buy. And note that low visibility vehicles that are highlighted in the red box on the screen are all currently scoring 4 or 5 stars under the current NCAP criteria. So to close out, NHTSA can fulfill its mandate to update NCAP and comprehensively protect people who are outside of vehicles by expanding test criteria for ADAS features to account for the technology's known shortcomings, while also testing for safety measures beyond ADAS, like direct vision, size, hood height, weight, and so on. And if you would like to write to NHTSA in support of these changes to NCAP, you can do so until June 8th, and NACTO will actually be issuing a template letter that addresses all of these issues and more by around May 20th. So I would highly recommend following our Twitter at NACTO for that announcement. Thank you.
Thank you, Sindhu. So why don't we get our cameras back on, folks, and we'll let Kevin lead some Q&A. He had some prepared questions, and I know Kate's gathering some questions from the chat. And boy, that was really great from my perspective as I look for my camera. Just that I really appreciate, Sindhu, the way you brought in the fact, because I've heard this from some people too. Why are you talking about cars when we should be looking at street design or drivers or something else? And it's just really important to note that for those that aren't familiar with it, there's a system called Safe Systems Approach. And part of the Safe Systems Approach, and we strongly believe in in street design as critical. We don't believe in victim blaming of pedestrians. But this vehicle safety stuff, as you just saw, is really critically important. So I just really appreciate the perspective that everybody brought into this on safety. So Kevin, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So it's really remarkable and tragic that safety for people outside of vehicles has never figured into ratings until now. Given rising pedestrian fatalities, why didn't this happen sooner?
That sounds like a David or Kathy answer to me.
That sounds like a NHTSA question. I'm glad to try to address it. I think that, and I agree with what David has said, it's really embarrassing, to be honest, that the United States has fallen so far behind when we were the global leaders in creating NCAP. And in part, to be frank, it was political, politics always factors into everything. But I think David touched upon the Obama administration, late in their administration, released a proposal, which even at that point was overdue, to be quite frank. And I put up the timeline earlier that showed the different actions that have been taken, and then nothing happened during the Trump administration in terms of NCAP. And now with the Biden administration, we have this proposal. And even with this proposal, we're not thrilled. It's definitely, there are some advances, including for pedestrian AEB, which are steps in the right direction. But we would like to see more, and that's what our comments are going to reflect. And we're being very deliberative in our comments, recognizing that it's taken this long to get to this point. So it's crucial that NCAP, again, as David mentioned, be a motivator that exceeds our regulations, especially considering our regulations are lagging. And I think David probably, might have a comment as well on this, but I just wanted to note something about what Sindhu said in terms of ADAS not being a silver bullet. And, you know, we agree, but part of the challenge right now with ADAS is that there are no regulations for it. So while they're, you know, increasing in our market right now, there's no level of performance. So one automotive manufacturer could put out a fantastic system. Another could put out a substandard system. And it really is a disvalue to both the people in and outside the cars. And that's why one of our main priorities has been to push for these minimum regulations in concert with NCAP. The two have to work, should work hand in hand, one to set a minimum standard and the other to inspire innovation above the minimum performance standards.
Yeah, maybe just to follow up, I mean, I think there was tremendously good presentations. Actually, I really enjoyed that. Agreed with everybody. I think to answer your question, why has it taken so long for pedestrians? I think part of the story was occupant retention was really bad for many decades. You know, going back to Ralph Nader and Unsafe at Any Speed, and it was only in the mid-90s that the issues of intrusion were really properly dealt with, occupant compartments collapsing and so on, which is why, in fact, airbags took a long time to deliver. That's because, in fact, the body shells were still collapsing. And then in parallel, you start to get technologies of crash avoidance, the so-called ADAS systems coming on stream, and that opened up new opportunities. But it's true that the US lagged behind. In Europe, as I mentioned, a voluntary agreement with industry, which is interesting. It was a voluntary agreement that they started to agree to do this, to modify the fronts of cars to soften them up. And really, the US should have been in sync with that. That then became an EU regulation. Then it was taken up as a UN regulation, because the UN has a system of regulations which the US is party to under something called the 1998 agreement. Interestingly, NHTSA played a significant role in developing the global standard for pedestrian regulations. They were involved in the discussions, but they just never applied it. And you know, I've always found it strange why the US sort of fell behind on this. I mean, one thing I would say, and I completely agree with Mike about safe systems approach, we've got to be careful about pigeonholing any of this. You know, we need the mantra is avoid, shift, improve. We want to avoid unnecessary travel. We want to shift towards less polluting, less dangerous modes and so on. And we want to improve, and that's the technology piece. And I think these things are all actually interlocked and should support each other. So the move towards low speed zones in urban environments will be massively helped by intelligent speed assistance. It will ease the enforcement burden. It'll make it easier for drivers to accept the speed limit or obey the speed limit, and it will reduce kinetic energy in crash environments. And when you look at the different, the pedestrian friendly, the softer vehicle fronts will be better. AEB will be better with less speed. Less speed always helps because it's loading the system less. So now that we have a technology that can manage speed, I think it should be right up front and central as a demand here, because it will, as I say, reduce the burden, if you like, of managing kinetic energy across the piece.
All right, that starts to anticipate my next question, which is road fatalities have been in the neighborhood of 40,000 a year for several decades in the US. Are we doomed to manage to a relatively constant level of carnage, or do you have some optimism that some of the measures that have been mentioned here, whether it's speed management, standards, technological change, or something else, could meaningfully drive down the absolute number of deaths and serious injuries?
I think we should throw it to Sindhu first on this one, since, yeah.
Or I can attempt to answer that. So I think the National Roadway Safety Strategy that US DOT released a few months ago is a promising step and really outlines how the federal government can implement the safe systems approach that was mentioned earlier. And I think what's promising about it is that it really emphasized redundancy in safety features and interventions, and recognizes how different types of interventions, from street design to vehicle safety standards and design, can work together to cut down on that horrifying number of crashes and fatalities that happen each year. So I think that's a step forward, but at the same time, some ambition and targets and action is definitely necessary. And the NCAP program, I really see that as the one thing advocates can really do now to influence vehicle design. So it's definitely necessary to take advantage of that opportunity and push NHTSA and USDOT to be as ambitious as possible in this update, which frankly, the current proposal could go further in doing.
Yeah, just a quick comebacker, Sindhu. You had mentioned growing vehicle size, weight, and body type as factors in the rising pedestrian fatalities. So, like you got into this in your presentation, but maybe say just a bit more about what's the optimal mix of responses to that, right? Regulations seem like maybe not politically in reach. Ratings, would they really move the needle on consumer preferences like that? Or what do you see as the most effective way to begin to get at that?
So consumer education through NCAP is an essential step, and incorporating how safe vehicles really are for people outside of them is a huge step, and a long needed factor that should be integrated into NCAP. But really, personally, I don't think that there's any amount of consumer education that's an adequate replacement for updating FMVSS. And part of the reason that vehicles have been allowed to grow so much larger, heavier, more dangerous is because of this negligence of FMVSS and failure to really update those standards to consider pedestrian safety. And I think the numbers that we're seeing now are a result of that lack of action.
So FMVSS is Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards, which we can, for those, I try to avoid acronyms and I use them all the time. So that's basically what's required. So an airbag or a seatbelt is in that. Whereas NCAP is just saying, let's test the efficacy of these and rate cars on certain technology. So this rulemaking is around NCAP. I personally think it's appropriate to say to people, put it in the FMVSS, put it in the new vehicle regs, not this alone. So, okay, it's 2:56 or 4 minutes from the hour, depending on what time zone you're in. Kathy has to leave on the hour. Sindhu and David can hang out a few extra minutes with Kevin. We'll keep talking, and I'm so grateful to not just Kathy's participation in this, but the work of advocates for highway and auto safety. They're really a go-to resource for us in understanding these issues, and their leadership on these types of safety technology is outstanding. So thank you, Kathy. If you like these, I'm gonna make a couple of closing, folks, for anyone else who has to leave on the hour before we do a little more Q&A. If you like what you see, please donate to americawalks.org. You can find it, americawalks.org/donate. Your individual donations are flexible funding that we can put towards the most pressing issues that we face, and this is clearly one of them with the pedestrian safety crisis. If you want to comment, americawalks.org/blog. I think out of our top 6 blog posts, you're going to see an interview with David, an analysis of the comment opportunities, a link to the comment thread, as well as other materials. And we'll have a follow-up blog post for the attendees here that will have the materials that they've shared with us and the like. And you can share, like and share, share with your organizations. It's a very long, complex rulemaking process, and there are people who will provide extremely detailed technical comments, Processes like these are extremely important just to show that at the very, at the very basic values level, what we want to see. And we will help you boil that down, but use your own words and find your own information as well, or the things you want to emphasize in this process as well. And I really appreciate too that the issues that were brought up about how they're going to test and who they're going to look at, the equity considerations about whether we're looking at an average sized male, a white male, or whether we're looking at people of color, or whether we're looking at people in a wheelchair, whether we're looking at children or seniors. There are really very important equity considerations in here as well that need to be impressed upon USDOT as well. That they're excluding bicycles really raises questions about, from the testing, really raises questions about whether they will have the ability to detect someone in a wheelchair. So I think these are, or other mobility assisted device. So please, everyone, this is the plea to weigh in, look how you can engage and help share with others, and we'll keep communicating with you about this. So with that, Kate, were there any questions in the chat that really jumped out as ones that came multiple times that people wanted to hear about from the audience?
Yeah, there were a few. Actually, Kathy, since we have you for one more minute, there was somebody that asked if you were creating and sharing model comments for people to copy and submit, and where they could find those.
That's a great question. It's something we're contemplating right now, to be honest. Our website is saferoads.org. As Mike mentioned, there are varying levels of complication in terms of what our comments will be. So ours will be pretty technical. So I'm to be determined, but anyone should please feel free to send me an email. I shared my email address, but it's cchase@saferoads.org. And we'd be glad to try to assist in the process. I just, before I hop off, I really want to commend Mike and Kate for pulling together this tremendous panel. It's such an honor to participate with Sindhu and David, long-time collaborators and doers of good trouble, as Congressman John Lewis is infamous for saying. And so I'm looking forward to continuing all of our collaboration to make our roads safer for everyone. So thank you so much.
And I'm sure, thank you, Kathy. I'm sure NACTO will have ways for people to comment as well. That's nacto.org. And we're going to keep trying to refine suggestions to you as well as to the issues you could comment on. Other questions, Kate, that came from the audience that you saw?
Yeah, this one was specifically for David. Somebody asked if you could talk more about retrofitting safety devices on older vehicles. That was a question we got a couple of times.
Sure, quite a lot of the ADAS technologies, it's not possible. But the one that I've been sort of banging on about the most is intelligent speed assistance. It can. And I think this is very important, actually. One of the, in answer to Kevin's point earlier, can we ever get real progress and how are we going to do this? One of the things to look at, I think, where you could really accelerate progress is fleets, corporate and public sector fleets. They can be champions well ahead of what private vehicle use is. And again, Sindhu mentioned London. London is really pioneering this. ISA is now being equipped throughout the entire London transport bus fleet. The trials they've already had show enormously positive results. One is a huge reduction in tracking of speed violations of buses. And actually buses have been quite seriously involved in pedestrian fatalities in London. So that's very, very positive. Also, on the visibility issue, London has pioneered for larger trucks a new standard, so-called direct vision standard, which massively improves the visibility through bigger windshield and mirrors and so on, reducing the blind spots on trucks. This is, by the way, included in the European General Safety Regulation, although it's not being applied for a few more years. It's a bit delayed, more than I would like. But London has taken its own initiative, and it's effectively applying a zone system. And actually, off the top of my head, I can't remember exactly when it kicks in. But within a few years, you will not be able to drive a poor performing truck into London unless you have a rating on the direct vision score of London. This is a big opportunity for cities. Cities can act as quasi-regulators here. And of course, with London, it all fits with their push towards more 20-mile-an-hour zones and so on. And that's where the infrastructure story and the technology story all sort of should fit together. And so I think if you have to identify what are going to be the change makers that really can accelerate things, look at fleets, not just public, but also private. And I think on the private side, it's possible to demonstrate a very strong business case that this makes sense to corporates, because after all, they're running businesses. I mean, they don't want to have crashes. Of course, we don't want to have crashes for obvious humanitarian reasons, but businesses don't want to have crashes because it involves vehicles off the road, it exposes them to other costs, insurance costs, etc., etc. So if you can show to them that having ISA is really going to save you money, then why not? And that's where the retrofit system, that you can completely fit these things out, entire fleets. To me, it's an absolute no-brainer. And in fact, it's a US company that supplies one of the most effective. So the system I have, it's produced by a company called Sturdy, S-T-U-R-D-Y. And if I was running, fortunately, I don't run a transport fleet, but if I did, for sure, I would be retrofitting ISA immediately.
It's based on what David mentioned to me, I looked into this further. Yeah, this is not like a concept. There is a company that does this right now. And in addition to being able to reduce speeds, particularly through residential areas or high pedestrian areas or school zones, in addition to reducing accidents, they also limit how quickly you can accelerate, which is another factor that's dangerous. But you put it all together, the companies that install this also use a lot less fuel. So this is also has a cost savings to them and a climate benefit as well. Like we talk about fuel efficiency standards for vehicles being regulated, but simply retrofitting existing fleets would also reduce global warming emissions and reduce pollution in those neighborhoods as well. So, and it saves companies money. So I like David, I'm thinking, when I first dealt with this intelligent speed assistance or speed limiters as it's commonly known, I did not realize the degree to which it exists, it's being implemented, it's cost effective, and it makes a ton of sense from a business perspective, besides the obvious safety and pollution costs that are averted by communities.
Mike, if I could just make one extra point, what's interesting in the European Union legislation, the so-called package called the General Safety Regulation, the people who did all the cost-benefit analysis, they did it all together, and so each measure is linked to the other one, if you see what I mean. So it's like a cascading benefit. And what they showed is that ISA improves all the others, which is really interesting. It's showing these cumulative benefits. And so I think it's something that in the US, the debate about ISA should really be lifted up, I think.
Well, we're trying. Kate, other questions?
Yeah, this one we got that asked if we were to only submit one ask to the comment portal, what would you all encourage that they ask for?
I can answer that first. And the first thing I would say is that there's no reason any comments have to be limited to just one ask. It can, any comment can cover any number of issues. So I urge everyone here to bring up a full, to be comprehensive in their requests. But I think the way NACTO has organized our comments is to really highlight four major things. One is highlighting the limitations of ADAS while also being supportive of those pieces of the proposal, to also ensure the tests for those systems cover known drawbacks of those systems as well. Two, we are also strongly in favor of intelligent speed assistance and call for the inclusion of that technology into NCAP. 3, we are recommending looking more closely into the vehicle size and weight issue and making sure that vehicles that are too big or heavy and pose dangers to pedestrians for those reasons do not receive 5-star ratings or safe ratings. And lastly, we highlight the direct vision issue and making sure that vehicles are designed in a way to maximize visibility so that drivers can actually see the people that they are at risk of hitting. So I can't pick one thing, but if I had to narrow it down to 4, it would be those 4.
I think that's awesome. I'm gonna go with you. Don't pick just one. Kevin, do you have a closing question for our remaining panelists? If you were to close. That's not a bad closing one, which was what we pick, but.
Yeah, I didn't have one in mind. Let's see if we can come up with something here just from what we've heard.
Okay, well, you think about that. One more question from Kate, and then we'll have a closing question.
Yeah, you do that.
Sure. There were a few people that asked along the lines of where the opposition to these changes are coming from, especially here in the US. If one of you wants to hop into that.
Well, maybe on ISA, there has been a big battle. I mean, ISA technology has been around for 10, 15 years. And the interesting thing on the manufacturer side, it's not altogether surprising. It was opposed the strongest by the more high performance vehicle manufacturers. So BMW and people like that were complaining a lot and using a lot of, they were asking for perfection. They were saying you can't have a system which might occasionally get things wrong. So, and it's true that any system may not detect the speed limit accurately. But Mobileye, another company which produces these technologies, has produced evidence showing it's like 95% reliable. So, but that was a big problem. The other problem is a sort of populist one of people saying this is Big Brother controlling the way you drive and speeding. And the interesting thing is that real world experience of using these systems tends to generate a completely different reaction. And a few years back, a real petrol head magazine, Autocar, which is like Car and Driver in the US, some of their top journos spent some time with vehicles with ISA, and they all came away saying they liked it. And so you've got to get over this kind of barrier of opposition, which is based on ignorance and prejudice and some branding issues of manufacturers who feel that they can't sell cars without the hint that they can speed. But I think you just keep at it, just keep fighting. The other thing is that the whole discussion about autonomous vehicles, which I think is way long in the future, but the way to turn this around a bit is how on earth can you have autonomous vehicles if you don't first have ISA? It's actually the precursor technology to anything like that. And people have got to get used to that kind of speed management before we could possibly contemplate large-scale fleets of autonomous vehicles. So, you know, really, I think it's a wake up and smell the coffee moment. My final really controversial, throw a big stone in the pond, is if we're really going to get to tackle big trucks and the light trucks and SUVs, we've got to have road pricing as you go, you know, road pricing, which is differentiated by vehicle size. So if you want to drive through a small village in Kent, where I live, or the center of London in a huge, you know, truck, you're going to have to really pay a lot of money to do it. And I think pretty soon you'll find a lot of downsizing going on. But I know that is not easy to achieve. But in the end, I think that's the way we've got to go. And it's also about reducing the external costs. These big vehicles are causing a lot more damage than smaller vehicles, so they should be expected to pay it.
Answer that from a different angle, which is that large vehicles and big trucks are very profitable for the vehicle car industry, and they have spent a lot of money on advertising for these vehicles, and they're very expensive. So taking those off the market would be a big financial issue for those companies, and I think it's kind of intuitive why they don't want to see that happen, even at the huge safety and environmental costs that we've covered.
So you want me to give a closing? So my closing question would have to do with if you're a pedestrian you don't really want to get hit by a motor vehicle at all, right? I mean, it's good to design them so there's less impact, less carnage if there is an impact, but you really want to avoid it. And America Walks, traditionally given kind of more focus on how our streets designed, because that has a big impact on how people behave and whether they speed and what have you. It's just maybe just any reflections you have, and Sindhu, I know NACTO deals with this whole swath of issues as well. So just your thoughts about the correlation between the the vehicle design elements of this and the street design elements and just kind of words of wisdom as to how do we solve the fundamental issue of pedestrian safety, and what's the right mix of responses for society to tackle that.
Two-pronged point to make there. One is, as we mentioned already, the approach to a safe systems approach to safety really requires a multi-layered approach, and design and vehicle, street design and vehicle design are both really important aspects of making that happen and achieving that vision for safety. And second, as I think I mentioned in my presentation, cities have control over how their streets are designed for the most part, and they can influence that piece of the safety puzzle, but vehicle design and safety are solely in the hands of the federal government, and we need action from NHTSA to regulate how vehicles are designed to protect people if we want to cut down or really reverse the really troubling trends we've seen around traffic fatalities and pedestrian and cyclist fatalities especially.
So my take, I completely agree with everything Sindhu just said, and just to maybe unpack a little bit more the safe system. One of the great inspirations behind the safe system approach was the work of James Reason, and he famously came up with this defense in depth view of safety, and a Swiss cheese diagram which showed layers of Swiss cheese with holes, and the whole idea was not to allow an arrow to penetrate all the way through. That's sort of the direction of travel and injury, and you avoid that by having these different layers of defense. And I think that's the way to view something like softer vehicle fronts. This is one part of a quite complex layered system of defense, and hopefully it's never needed. And hopefully I think in a way, the primary area is road design that actually makes it extremely hard for pedestrians ever to be in those environments. But where that does happen, you want all the other things coming in, including just lower the whole speed profile, and then have an A/B system, for example, so that the vehicle may itself be wiping out even more pre-crash energy. And then in the event, which is the last bit of the chain, if there is going to be an impact, make it as soft as possible. And it's the interaction of all of those that will deliver the safe system and ultimately reduce injury.
Well, with that, I'm going to say thank you again to our panelists. Thank you to Kate for the tech and monitoring the questions, and thank you to Kevin, one of our board members, former board chair, and also works at Rails Trails Coalition for bringing the questions. And stay tuned for our next webinar, which we'll be advertising to all of you shortly. And thank you for joining us.
Thanks very much.